Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this great body of wisdom that we inherit and that we contribute to. We are in the penultimate Torah portion of Book of Deuteronomy, and indeed of the 5 books of Moses. That is Ha'azinu. It's in the Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, beginning with verse 1. We will read through the English translation of our portion. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. And if you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, together we can recite the blessing, giving thanks for sharing in this moment. Baruch atah Elohim melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivonu b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Let me share with you the opening verses of our weekly Torah portion, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 1. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words I utter. May my discourse come down as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. For the name of Adonai I proclaim, give glory to our God. The rock, God's deeds are perfect, yea, all God's ways are just. A faithful God, never false, true and upright is God. Children unworthy of him, that crooked, perverse generation, their baseness has played God false. We're on now verse 6. Richard, would you like to read a little bit starting there?
Thank you. Do that which like the Lord. O dull and witless people, is not he the Father who created you, fashioned you, and made you endure? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of ages past. Ask your father, he'll inform you. Your elders, they will tell you. When the Most High gave nations their homes and set the divisions of man, he fixed the boundaries of people in relation to Israel's numbers. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his own allotment.
Thank you, Richard. And let me invite Dave Leb. Would you like to continue there at verse 10?
God found them in a desert region, in an empty, howling waste. God engirded them and watched over them, guarded them as the pupil of God's eye. Like an eagle who rouses its nestlings, gliding down to its young, so did God spread wings and take them, bear them along on pinions. Adonai alone did guide them, no alien God alongside.
Thank you, Dave. Let me invite David and Susan, if you'd like to continue there at verse 13.
He had it ride over the earth's high places and fed it the field bounties, and had it suck honey from a rock, and oil from a flint rock, and curds of cattle and milk of the flock, and fat of lambs, and Bashan rams, and he goats, with fat of innards of wheat. And from grapes' blood you drank wine.
And Jeshurun fattened and kicked. You fattened, you thickened, grew gross, and abandoned the God who made him, and despised the rock of his rescue. He provoked him with strangers, with abhorrences he did vex him. They sacrificed to the demons, the ungods, gods they had not known, new ones just come lately, whom their fathers had not feared. The rock your bearer you neglected. You forgot the God who gave you birth.
Thank you both so much. Let me invite Kath. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 19?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Yud-He-Vav-He saw and was vexed and spurned these sons and daughters. God said, I will hide my countenance from them and see how they fare in the end. For they are a treacherous breed, children with no loyalty in them. They incensed me with no gods, vexed me with their futilities. I'll incense them with a no folk, vex them with a nation of fools. For a fire has flared in my wrath and burned to the bottom of the Sheol, has consumed the earth and its increase, eaten down to the base of the hills. I will sweep misfortunes on them, use up my arrows on them, wasting famine, ravaging plague, deadly pestilence, and fanged beasts will I let loose against them, with venomous creepers in the dust.
Thank you so much. Justin, would you like to continue there at verse 25?
Thank you, Rabbi. From outside, the sword will bereave, and terror from within. Young men and maidens, suckling babes and venerable elders. I said I would make an end of them, eradicate their remembrance from humankind. Were it not that the enemy's wrath was heaped up, lest their adversaries distort, lest they claim, our hand was triumphant. The Lord did none of this. For they are a nation devoid of counsel, and they have no understanding. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would reflect upon their fate. How can one person pursue 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight, unless their mighty rock has sold them out and the Lord has given them over? For their rock is not like our mighty rock. Nevertheless, our enemies sit in judgment.
Thank you so much. And Rose, would you like to continue there at verse 32?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The vine for them is from Sodom, from the vineyards of Gomorrah. The grapes for them are poison, a bitter growth, their clusters. Their wine is the venom of asps, the pitiless poison of vipers. Lo, I have all put away, sealed up in my storehouses, to be my vengeance and recompense at the time that their foot falters. Yea, their day of disaster is near, and destiny rushes upon them. For Hashem will vindicate God's people and take revenge for God's servants upon seeing that their might is gone and neither bond nor free is left. God will say, where are the gods, the rock in whom they sought refuge, who ate the fat of their offerings and drank their libation wine? Let them rise up to your help, and let them be your shield unto you.
Thank you so much, Rose. Mark Thompson, would you like to continue there at verse 39? And you'll have to unmute, Mark.
I'm sorry. See then that I am he. There is no God beside me. I deal death and give life. I wounded and I will heal. None can deliver from my hand. Lo, I raise my hand to heaven and say, as I live forever, when I whet my flashing blade and my hand lays hold on judgment, vengeance will I wreak on my foes. Will I deal to those who reject me? I will make my arrows drunk with blood as my sword devours flesh, blood of the slain and the captive from the long-haired enemy chiefs. O nations, acclaim his people, for he'll avenge the blood of his servants, wreak vengeance on his foes, and cleanse the land of his people.
Thank you, Mark. And Robert, would you like to pick up there at verse 44?
Yes, thank you. And Moses came and spake all the words of this song in the ears of the people, he and Hosea, the son of Nun. And Moses made an end of speaking all these words to all Israel. And he said unto them, set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day, which ye shall command your children to observe to do, all the words of this law. For it is not a vain thing for you, because it is your life, and through this thing ye shall prolong your days in the land, whither ye go over Jordan to possess it. And the Lord spake unto Moses that selfsame day, saying, get thee up into this mountain, Abarim, unto the mount of Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, that is over against Jericho, and behold the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel for a possession. And die in the mount whither thou goest up, and be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron thy brother died in Mount Or, and was gathered unto his people. Because ye trespassed against me among the children of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, because ye sanctified me not in the midst of the children of Israel. Yet thou shalt see the land before thee, but thou shalt not go thither unto the land which I give the children of Israel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this time. And I'd like to share with you some of the just images that were making themselves present to me as I was studying this week's Torah portion. I'd just like to explore them a little bit with you, and then we will open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. At the very beginning of the Torah portion, as Moses is, along with Joshua, singing this song, Moses calls out in verse 4, the rock, God's deeds are tamim, which we can translate as many different ways, perhaps here as complete. The rock, God's deeds are complete. So here we have this image that Moses is sharing with us about God as a almost indestructible rock, something firm, something eternal, something that is mighty and strong and something you can rely upon. And then we have some other images, though, that appear elsewhere in our literature, and that conveys perhaps a counter image, if you will. And this is from the prophet Jeremiah. Behold, my word is like fire, like a hammer that shatters rock. So here the prophet is conveying something about the divine word as not being a rock, but being a force that can shatter rock. So as I was considering these two images, I was playing with the notion about, on the one hand, image of rock, and then on another hand, some kind of a power that has the capacity to shatter rock. And so I would just like to play with those notions a little bit to see perhaps what we might be finding in this week's Torah portion that could be inspiring, particularly at this time in our season, as we are in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, as we are in this process of, on the one hand, acknowledging the sovereignty of God, and then on the other hand, we are now moving towards this period in our calendar where we are assuming responsibility for reshaping the world by asking for tshuva, by performing tshuva, which is an enormous human capacity and responsibility. So I'd like to look for a moment at number 3 on the study sheet, which is by the great 19th century Hasidic rabbi, the Sfat Emet, who says, listen, O heavens, and I shall speak, from our Torah portion. And Sfat Emet says, this refers to the 10 commandments. Let earth hear the words of my mouth, also from our portion. This refers to the 10 utterances of creation, that is oral Torah. God gave the Torah so that Israel would repair all that had been created by the 10 utterances. Torah is thus a commentary or interpretation of creation itself. Well, we know that when we read the opening of Genesis, that all there is at some point is either you can conceive of it as nothing or everything. And then when God begins to speak, individuated aspects of the divine come into existence. Seas, mountains, animals, fish, human beings. And so we have this notion that at some point there was just totality, and then totality shatters into an individuated aspects. And indeed, we have this beautiful bit of sacred mythology that we call Kabbalah, and in the Zohar makes it clear, and that again, all there was a kind of a totality that we can't even begin to imagine, and then things begin to fracture. And within Kabbalah, especially as formulated by Isaac Luria in the 16th century, he formulates this bit of, again, sacred mythology that God's effluence comes into this dimension and begins to try and locate itself into individuated aspects, and those individuated aspects shatter because of their incapacity to hold on to the totality of the power of the divine. And so we have this notion that creation, whether it's viewed through the text in Genesis, whether it's viewed through the Zohar, whether it's viewed through Isaac Luria, that creation is a fracturing experience. And that there are all these shards, according to Kabbalah, that it's now human responsibility to begin to piece together, to repair. And so those are some of the images that were coming to mind as I was reading this week's Torah portion, this capacity of God's strength, God's presence, God's being a rock, but then also this shattering of that rock. And the Sfat Emet is emphasizing these two different aspects of Torah, if you will, the written Torah and oral Torah. And so what I've been playing with is, well, which is of those two, which is the shattering one and which is the healing one? So if you turn over, well, before you turn over, let's look at our painting here. So this is an early Cubist painting. This is by Georges Braque. Braque, along with Picasso, are really the founders of what becomes known as the Cubist movement in the very early 20th century. I believe the first real Cubist painting was one done by Picasso in 1907. This is done by Braque in 1909, 1910. And what both Picasso and Braque are dealing with here is they have inherited the early stages of what becomes known as modern art through the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, and then most significantly for the two of them, Cézanne, who begins to feel that the artist is not merely there to replicate nature, that the artist is in fact encountering nature, and it's that encounter with nature that is to be represented on the canvas. So it becomes much more of a clearly subjective image that's being portrayed on the canvas. The Cubists take it even further, because what they do is they begin to recognize it's not either nature nor our own subjective encounter with nature, but really we can begin to deform nature and reconstruct it in terms of our own understanding of it. And the way the Cubists understood what they were encountering, the nature, the very vitality of nature itself, is how fractured it is. And so you see here these images of, first on the lower portion of the painting is a violin, and then if you kind of look up to the neck of the violin and slightly to the left of the violin, of the neck of the violin is a pitcher, and then the rest is the space around it. So what the Cubists do is they begin to fracture everything that is in nature into multiple planes of existence. And they do it in such a way as to have the capacity to look at different sides of objects simultaneously. So for example, if you look at the violin, you'll see that the strings of the violin are flat and they're facing up towards us. But when you look at the neck, you can see that the neck it has been torqued in such a way that is abnormal to what would be the position that the neck should be in, depending upon where the strings are. And not only is the object itself, the violin, and then above it, the pitcher, have been refracted into different facets, but all the space around it has also been refracted and broken up into different facets, so that there is really no, in a sense, there's no empty space. The empty space has all been taken up by these different facets. So this is the great contribution that the Cubists were making, which is to break away from the notion that there is just one way to look at something, that it's possible to recognize that everything that we encounter has multiple dimensions to it, multiple sides to it, and that what an artist has the capacity to do is to look at all of those at the same time and to share those with us. So, of course, this is all developing at the same time that physicists were beginning to recognize that Newtonian physics, which had prevailed for hundreds of years, did not have the capacity to explain a lot of anomalies that were being observed. And so physicists, including Einstein and Bohr and others, were beginning to recognize the multidimensionality of the universe. So if we turn over now, there's this very compelling statement that our artist George Brock made about art. And he said, art is a wound transformed into light. So I'm pondering that. And what it causes me anyway to think about is that it is as if the wound is what is endemic to nature itself, and that the artist has the capacity to transform that into something that is healing. Now, this goes back to our Kabbalists, and indeed, I would suggest embedded deeply into Jewish tradition, which is that to say that creation itself is a fracturing experience. And that lesson gets carried over, I would suggest, into much of 20th century psychology as well, which is to recognize that to come into existence, to be born, is itself a fracturing experience. It is, by definition, to be born is to become separated. And so what psychology tries to do, and what psychotherapy tries to do, is to take that shattering experience of becoming a human being and to find ways to move through that in a way that is reparative, self-reparative perhaps, and also to maximize one's healthy capacity to move through what will probably be a series of ongoing fractures and separations in the course of one's existence. So this notion then that what we're getting from our artist and what we're getting from Jewish tradition, that existence itself, creation itself, is a matter of shattering. Well, if that's the case, then what's the healing? Who has the power to then heal? If you look at number 5, this is a commentary from a midrash called Sifrei Devarim, and it's going to be comparing what Moses has said here and the words that he has used in Hebrew, which we've tried to translate as close as possible in the English, with a verse from the prophet Isaiah. So the midrash compares these two different verses because they have similar words that appear, but in different order. So here's the verse from that is from our Torah portion, which is, listen, O heavens, and hear, O earth. So the midrash says, listen, O heavens. Because Moses was close to the heavens, he said, listen, O heavens. And because he was far from the earth, he said, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Isaiah came and followed suit, saying, hear, O heavens, and listen, earth, being far from the heavens and close to the earth. So what the midrash is doing here is very interesting. It is acknowledging that Moses and Isaiah use the same words, but they use them in different order. And according to the midrash, what that order means is that Moses was closer to heaven than he was to earth, and that Isaiah, using the same words but in different order, was indicating that Isaiah was far from heavens and closer to the earth. So here, Moses, according to Jewish tradition, is the conveyor of, champion of written Torah, that which comes directly from God, if you will. And here we have our prophet, who is now speaking words that are directed at what's happening right here on earth, trying to correct human behavior. So in a sense, what the midrash is hinting at is that Isaiah is a more advanced form of spirituality, if you will. That he's taking these words that have been given and is now directly applying them to the human condition. In number 6, we go back to our Hasidic Rabbi Sfat Emet, who says, that is why this Ha'azinu Shirah, this song, was sung by Moses and Joshua together, joining the written Torah to the oral Torah. It says, may my teaching drop as rain. For the purpose of Torah is to bring forth into reality all that which God has hidden in the world, just as the rain brings the fruit of the soil forth from the earth. We have this notion about an oral Torah and a written Torah and an oral Torah. And what's important, according to Sfat Emet, is that Moses, who represents written Torah, and Joshua, who represents oral Torah, are singing this song together because there's an acknowledgement that things will constantly be shattered and things can constantly be healed. But notice, according to all this bit of commentary that we've just gone through, who is doing the shattering and who is doing the healing? I want to suggest that what all this material is now hinting at is that the divine bit of creation is the shattering, and is the human capacity to interpret how to live that is the healing aspect of it. So this is an enormous expression of confidence in the human capacity to bear this responsibility of healing and to bring forth a resolution of the inherent shattering experience of creation, of being born, and of being alive. And I believe that, in a sense, is what our Cubist artists are also hinting at, which is that existence itself is a shattering experience. But if we apply ourselves to it, we can see the beauty in it and bring about a healing and a light, as George Brock has mentioned. And with that, I'd love to hear what you saw, what you experienced in the course of our reading of our Torah portion. I see that Susan and David, go ahead, please, and then Rose.
Oh,
Well, David raised his hand, but without the shattering, you can't have the healing.
You know, and of course, this goes back to our very first story about human beings in the Bible, right? Which is that unless you have this rupture from the Garden of Eden, you're never going to develop into a fine human being. Unless your child gets out of the house, they're never going to fully develop. You know, as painful as it might be for either the parent or the child or both to be separated, it's the only way to fully develop. Thank you. And David, please.
yeah, I have one unformed comment and one unfortunately formed comment. And the first one is in the first verse or two, first verse, you have Ha'azinu, which is translated as listen, and a hear, which is a Shema word. And so have a curiosity sparked in my forebrain about the nuances of the differences between those two words, which is kind of what this particular devar is about. But as I say, it's an unformed comment. The formed comment that's I'm hoping is disruptive is that Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, because that's what I'm most familiar with, also talks about how being born is a shattering, in the sense that you go from a connection, a lack of understanding that you're different, that you're a separate thing, to becoming a separate thing, and then having life beat into you that you're separate. And then there's a trajectory. This is a human trajectory. It's not necessarily what happens to birds or dolphins or dogs. The human trajectory, if it is properly guided, is to repair the shattering or the separation by arriving at a place where you feel again connected with everything, and that you are part of everything, that you are everything and part of everything, etc. This whole picture is very similar to the Jewish Hasidic story that I'm hearing from you, Rabbi, but a fundamental difference that strikes me is that our understanding of it is that repair isn't something that we do to return ourselves to a lack of mystical separateness, but something that involves repairing everything, repairing the world, repairing other people, repairing our relationships with the world and other people. And it strikes me as just way more connected to living life in a healthy way than the Zen method, which is a place of monks and caves and isolation and really not engagement with everyone and everything.
Okay, well, I'm not going to comment on the Buddhist aspect of it, but I will say something about the Jewish aspect of it. So first of all, the Hebrew here for I think you suggested that verse was listen, O heavens. So it really is the word there has to do with putting in an ear, putting something in one's ear to lend one's ear is the first one. And then the Shema aspect of it, as we've talked about so many times, is not merely something about auditory experience, but also involves some degree of cognition, reflection, and then also response. So there are different nuances to those two different words. And then the aspect that you were commenting on in the second point is that what is most compelling about what our mission is as a human being is that it is not merely to learn, it's not merely to climb upward in our spiritual, up the spiritual ladder, but the real mission is to both climb that ladder, refine ourselves, and then come back down into this world to change the world, to make the world a place where the divine will dwell. So that's clearly what the mission is. So again, the beauty of the Garden of Eden story, which is this is not what the human enterprise is all about, to just sit here in this beautiful, perfect place and do nothing. It is to be, in a sense, if you want to call it exiled, to be dislocated from perfection in order to take on the responsibility of both transforming oneself and, in the consequence of doing that, transforming the world. So thank you for all those acknowledgements. Let me call upon Rose and then Richard here and Mark and Robert and Kath. Go ahead, Rose.
Well, thank you. I guess I'm kind of just, cleaving to the text a little bit more. And I guess I'm coming away with a darker thing. All what you're saying is about shattering and repairing is, certainly is part of it. But if you just are following the text, they're saying, Moses is saying, listen up, because you're being told what's going to happen if you go after false gods. And that's primarily what this is. It's not saying if you are bad to other people, or it's more if you follow false gods, I'm gonna whip your tuchus in no uncertain terms. And it's, the underlying thing is I'm a jealous God, and if you go with these other gods, you're toast. And it's kind of an unappealing view of a God. I mean, you're God. Why do you feel insecure? If somebody, goes and worships other gods, what is that to you? And, it just makes me wonder, I guess, because, when you're reading this, it's going, oh, he's going to do all these horrible things, with his mighty sword, and the blood will run all over the place. And, it's not as benign. He's the war god here, and it puts to mind the gods of that area. The god of thunder and bloodthirsty gods. He's not a nice guy in this.
So part of, at least the way I read it, is that part of this whole journey of what it means to be a human being, which is what this, in both the 5 books of Moses and the entirety of the Jewish Bible, is all about. How does one become a healthy human being? And one of the stages of that is to let go of this external force. I mean, that is what is happening gradually through Exodus, through Deuteronomy, which are these series of lessons about you need to make the transition from feeling that everything is being controlled by this external force that we'll give the name God to becoming a responsible human being that now is going to have the capacity for creating a world of one's own called the Promised Land. And so to the extent that, to the extent that we read this as that the world is controlled by an external divine force, yeah, I think that it distorts and forecloses human development. But if we read it as that what we're talking about is the internal dynamic of becoming a human being and reaching our capacity for responsibility and fulfillment, that's a very different story. And that's just the way I happen to read it. So, and
you know what, just reading the words, and if you just read the words, that's what it says. And
right.
it's
So,
just listen up, I'm gonna kick your butt, you know.
I agree. And Jewish and rabbinic tradition encourages us to read beyond the words on the page. It encourages us to look under them, to subvert them, to see beyond them. You know, so for example, when I was reading this week's Torah portion, I was thinking about poor Moses, you know, and what a heroic character he is. But then we have this wonderful story in Midrash where Moses appears at the study hall of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva is holding forth, and he's interpreting Torah, and he's interpreting not only the words themselves, but he's interpreting the calligraphic flourishes on the words. And Moses in the Midrash is in the back of the room. And traditionally, the back of the room is where the slow students were, not the top students. So first of all, so this wonderful Midrash has Moses being characterized as one of the slow students. And then Moses basically says, as he's hearing Rabbi Akiva expound on the written Torah, Moses goes, I don't understand a word he's saying, which is astounding because, well, Torah all comes from Moses, right? And he's not understanding anything that Rabbi Akiva is saying, because Rabbi Akiva has gone beyond the rigid black letters that appear on the page. And it's not until Rabbi Akiva says something like, and of course, all this comes from Moses himself, that Moses then feels, oh, okay, you know, now he feels recognized and satisfied and affirmed. So that's a lovely story in which the rabbis are kind of hinting at the fact that every generation, in a sense, to the degree that it takes this material seriously and respectfully and assumes responsibility for not only putting it into our ears, but hearing it in a way that then causes us to become creatively responsive to it, then we're honoring the text in a way that I think Jewish tradition wants us to. Let me call upon Mark, Robert, Richard, and Kath, and then, so Mark, please.
I am very intrigued by this painting by Brock for a lot of different reasons, but I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, why did he choose a violin to appear in the foreground, and what possible meaning could that have to the painting? And to me, in the background, we do have the rocks and the fragmentation, but for me, the violin represents obviously music, and I think about Kepler and his idea of the music of the spheres when he began to develop his concept of the law of planetary motion. But that this music is really the unifying force that transcends the superficiality of the fragmentation. To me, that the fact that he chose a violin, in a sense, it really reflects the Torah portion really well, because we're just getting into this poem, this song that continues to the next chapter as well. Moses and Joshua's song, which it's not particularly pleasant, as was mentioned earlier. But I mean, if you get past the anthropomorphic idea of God and just look at this painting and consider that, you know, these rocks or these fragmentations are really just aspects of who we are as fragments of God. I just find that painting to be very motivating. And I'm not sure what the vase would be there for. Anybody have any idea on that? I would be curious to hear.
Water is the source of all life.
There you go.
It was drawn from the water.
That's nice. Oh, Richard here says Moses was drawn from the water.
Okay, good. I
And
love it.
also acknowledge, I think it's a lovely thesis to say why a violin. And I want to acknowledge that a number of Cubist paintings involve either a violin or a guitar. Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, a vase is a classic element of a still life, right? And so he's taking a classic element of a still life painting and then, you know, reconstructing it in his own image. And I want to acknowledge, you know, beautiful what you said about the music. And although my physics history is not that great, but I believe it's several decades before we begin to have within contemporary physics the notion of string theory, right? That this vibrational aspect of the universe. But that maybe he's anticipating that within the context of all the other discoveries and theories in physics that are happening within the same period of time that he and Picasso are doing their Cubist paintings. So thank you for that. And Anna's here, and she's saying the vase may represent, the violin and the guitar also may represent the female form, which is a nice concept as well. Let me call upon Robert and then Richard and Kat. And please go unmute. Thank you, Robert.
You know, if I stay muted, whatever I say will be absolute perfection. Nobody could say, well, that doesn't make sense. No, I really appreciate the evening. Thank you so much. I always do. And I appreciate the different comments and the fact that oftentimes it comes back to the human condition. I was having coffee with a friend the other day. He's a physician. We don't get to see each other often. He's one of the few people locally that I can have a really, truly profound conversation with every time. And he said something I wrote down, and I think it's so apropos, physically, spiritually, and intellectually. What we see depends on how we look at it. Whether it be scripture or a physical condition, what we see in a person, what we see intellectually, and of course, talking about intellectually, physicists imagine all kinds of things. The other thing, you know, walking the spiritual path, I think that's common to all the great religions. In the Baha'i faith, the goal is to walk the spiritual path with practical feet, recognizing that adversity, challenge, ease, struggle, joy, all these things. I think Mark is familiar with my analogy of Chinese food, you know, a little bit of sweet, a little bit of sour, you put it all together, it's really, really good. And, but I wanted to also share a quote that I just love, and I think it fits so well into one way to look at what the human condition is for. And this is part of a longer chapter, but it says, "Praise be to God, man ever aspires to greater heights and loftier goals. He ever seeks to attain a world surpassing that which he inhabits, and to ascend to a degree above that which he occupies. The love of transcendence is one of the hallmarks of man." And for me, that is just an exquisite way to view the human condition, that we arise and struggle and we recognize it's not where we end up, it's the journey. It's always the journey. For a poet, a painter, It's when you're doing it that it's exciting. When you're done, most artists will say, yeah, well, it could have been, it could have been better. And the other thing that comes to mind is about a jealous God. And I'm so glad that Rose always goes back to scripture in a way that is I think, challenging. It's not challenging for me, by the way, but I think, you look at these, and I love that about Rose. Each one of you is a unique flower with your own beauty. But, I was thinking about that, being a jealous God. God is a parent. Now, how would we feel as parents if our children chose other parents when we had suffered for them, brought them into being, gave them the very best of education, of nurturing and everything, and they chose something less? Those parents would have wrath. So those are my only comments, other than it's a joy to be with you all. And, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And let me call upon Richard and then Kat.
Yeah, the thing about the rocks got me, and I remembered something. Isaiah, listen to me, you who follow after righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. And I thought, well, there's the womb. And part of what I'm thinking is, I have a good friend who's a devout Christian. He's a financial advisor, and we have long discussions. Wonderful fellow. And one day he asked me if I believe that Jesus Christ was God. And I just patted him on the shoulder and I said, well, aren't we all? And he said, yeah. But my notion is that to look to the hole from which we're born is about we are the whole thing and we are the individual. We've been shattered into this world, and if we govern it correctly and have empathy and not battle with one another, if we have empathy and are able to share that and position our perception so that we create a peaceful world, then we're rock solid. And the phrase that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, I've always taken that to mean by someone over there is beautiful because of the way in which I perceive them. I look for that and bring that out of them. And we can all do that. And so that we can take all these pieces and put them together and reconstruct the rock solidness. As it said, treat your neighbor as yourself, not like yourself, but as yourself, because there is only one self. And it's been torn apart, and we each continue to go through the reformation of ourselves, go through these periods of development. You get concrete reasoning, abstract reasoning, fundamentalist thinking. All this stuff goes through, and we have an opportunity through this study to, how do I become chatter the rock, and then we put it back together. It takes all of us to do it, and then we can feel that solidity of the absolute manifesting through us when we get rid of our ego and our desires. Get those out of the way, and we can form community. And it may be the case, for instance, one can look at the world now and what a terrible place it seems to be and get upset about it and angry about it, or maybe we can retool the way we see things. There's so many beautiful young people, so many things that are good going on, so many things are still being thought over, but the question is, do you bring to it animosity and fear, or do you bring to it being part of a community that is examining the hole from which the rock was born to get our shape back together as a unit? Very hard to do, but one last thing is Tarfon, Rabbi Tarfon says it's not your duty to finish the work, but you cannot not pick it up. And then he says, meaning the study of Torah, and you'll get your reward in the world to come. And I always feel that the world to come is constantly coming. Every moment, God is continuing to work on the world. And it's never finished because there's so many of us that's doing this stuff. But you're going to get your reward in the world to come. Well, the reward comes from doing the work, and doing the work is watching what's going on in your brain and how you're dealing with your emotions and your sharpness from being shocked up. And this is offering, you're old enough to look in the hole where you took the big rock out and got it shattered. Look at the hole, the shape is still there of the wholeness. That's who you are. Find the wholeness and understand that everybody you look at has the capacity to experience that wholeness if you don't pick a fight with them.
Thank you,
That's all I
Richard.
have to say.
Thank you. Okay, let me, Kath, please.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
last thing,
last
I swear. Vibration.
Yeah.
Dig those good vibrations. This here, this table, it appears solid, okay? But it is a vibration, it has a vibration, we all have a vibration. And the idea of meditation and these monks who don't do anything but sit around, no, they do something other than sitting around. They're generating a vibration of peace. And the Pre-Quran pick up on it a little, and maybe they read a little Torah, and maybe they start helping out in their community, and maybe they start being less judgmental and being nicer. I don't know. It's the vibration we carry with us that makes a difference. And mine's kind of, I have to be careful.
Thank you, Richard. And Kath, please.
I don't know if I can follow that.
Yeah.
Um, and someone may have mentioned this already, and so I apologize, I had to step away for a sec. But when I was thinking about the difference between the words listen and hear, listening is sort of the first step, like the taking in. And I think of the hearing as the next step, which is almost understanding, like taking it to a deeper level. It seems like there's a different quality to each of those words. And I think of hearing more as an understanding, and then listening is a getting it in the first step. So that was that part. And then I'm totally with Rose with all of there's a lot of darkness in this, but I did find this, if you think of it like an Oreo cookie, right? There's a little white section in there. And in verse 35, it says, to be my vengeance and recompense at the time that their foot falters. Yea, their day of disaster is near and destiny rushes upon them. For Yud-He Vav-He will vindicate God's people and take revenge for God's servants upon seeing that their might is gone and neither bond nor free is left. So it feels to me, that section feels like after all the screw ups and all the messing around, and when you're just at rock bottom, possibly in Richard's hole, there is God. So that God is there when that happens, was how I read that section, which gave me a little bit of hope. And again, back to my Oreo cookie analogy. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting with the painting, which I just love, is when Brock, how do you say his name?
Brock, yeah.
Brock, okay. When Brock says art is a wound transformed into light, how when things are fragmented, there is so much more opportunity for light to reflect off of it, because there's so many more parts of it. And I also thought how interesting it is that the violin is so prominent. I had to hunt for the picture. I mean, it's so much more in the back and so much part of all of that shattering that occurs. And then I also noticed at the top, it looked like there's a clock. At the very top, there are two black, there's like a little black triangle. And I was curious about like the hand of a clock, which I thought was interesting. And the column, like a column on the right. But those things caught my eye in it. But just that opportunity for so much light, because there's so many pieces.
Thank you. Beautiful. I like that you especially that you picked up on that notion about refraction. And I think that's also a key part of what comes out of our tradition, the notion of the importance of that refraction and how each facet has something to share. Rose, did you have more? No, okay. So I was tempted to also try and work in something about Piaget into this discussion. And maybe I'll say that for another time, but just briefly, Piaget talks about two different stages of development that are both important. Uh, one having to do with assimilation, where one just absorbs into an existing framework of perception and understanding experiences that are happening. And then another accommodation, which is the forming of new frameworks. And if all you have is assimilation, then you're not going to develop very much. You're just going to be absorbing information. And if all you have is constant reshaping of one's frameworks, then at some point you're going to have some kind of attenuation from your foundational growing up that gives you some basis for comfort and fortitude. And that may be also part of what's this notion about written Torah and oral Torah. And that may be what Safat Emet in his own way is trying to get at, which is important to have something that is both foundational and something that disrupts that foundation, if you will. But what I found intriguing going through this material is of all this, which is it that's the disruptive and which of it is the healing? And just to go back to our artist, as Cass just did, about Georges Braque, says, art is a wound transformed into light. So that notion, that acknowledgement, as our own spiritual tradition offers up, that we exist as human beings only because we have been fractured in some way. You know, the Kabbalah says we have forgotten ourselves into existence. And Midrash says right before a human being is born, they know everything. They know the future, they know the past, they know they know everything. And then as soon as they emerge out of the womb, an angel kisses them right here, and they forget everything. And so that notion about dislocation is that bit of wisdom is teaching us that to become born is to become dislocated, to become disoriented. And so we spend the rest of our days on a journey, which is what this book is about, on a journey trying to get back to some new place we've never been to, but as a place of promise, in a sense. So just to go back to our artist, Georges Braque, art is a wound transformed into light. Not only does he give voice to the notion that to be born and to exist is to be a wounded person, but that we have a capacity to heal that wound. And that is what our responsibility is. And we heal that wound not through blind obedience to anything or any spiritual being that we might imagine. No, in our tradition, it is by intervening, it is by challenging, and it is eventually by assuming responsibility for adding to a tradition that we become the artists that we're meant to be, and we become the healers of a wounded soul. So all that, I'm so grateful to be in a community of artists, all of us working to heal ourselves and the world around us. I'm so very grateful. Thank you very much, everyone. A good year for each and every one of us. God bless you all. Be well.
Good year, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Tova.
Thank you. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.